Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really special episode for you today featuring the channel's first Grand Seiko. Well, at least the first dedicated Grand Seiko video. Now, first of all, I wanted to thank Nick Shabazz very kindly. If you haven't seen his channel, he is huge in the knife world, and he's also a huge watch fan as well. But he will warn you, being a watch collector does get expensive, and he'll even tell you not to do it, guys. But Nick was kind enough to let me borrow his personal Grand Seiko for review. And although there have been actually tons of reviews of this model, and as well as like kind of the newer generation model of this particular Grand Seiko, I thought I'd make it a little bit different by actually comparing this to other Seikos in other tiers and really finding out how big of a difference there really is. So a little bit about the brand. Of course, Seiko was founded back in 1881, Japanese in origin, and have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry-level to high-end. And this is an example of that high-end division. Grand Seiko, now GS or Grand Seiko, was founded back in 1960, but they were only recently kind of separated as their own independent entity for the US. Now, this particular type of watch is, of course, a traveler's watch. Some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for a traveler's watch, you're going to want, of course, that GMT world timer functionality, so you'll be able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. Now, this particular model is part of their Grand Seiko Sport collection. It is the SBGE001, and if you get the newer model, which has been rebranded without having the Seiko Grand Seiko, it'll just be GS. Essentially, that is the SBGE001. Now, essentially, these models are used go anywhere between $4,000 to $5,000, or new, you can get them for $5,800 list. So with all that said, let's go ahead and take a closer look. Okay, as you can see here, wow, this is one handsome watch. It's beautiful, tactile, functional, even the movement, it's a true GMT movement. So essentially the local hour hand is independent versus the GMT hand. So this is a pretty special watch. Also, as you can see, it has that very, very smooth sweep with no ticks. Essentially, it is just a constant sweep, and they actually use a magnetic brake to slow it down, essentially, as it's unwinding. There are some really, really great detailed reviews kind of going over spring drive and the technology as a whole. But essentially, it's a mechanical watch that has a quartz regulation, and man, this thing, of course, this is a worn model, right? So it's gonna have some wear marks on it and whatnot, but you can still see the really the craftsmanship and the level shining through when you look at these details, when you look at that grip there on the coin edge. Beautifully done. And when you look at these beautiful links with a nice fine chamfer on there, and then you do have, of course, very key and very common Seiko design language when you have those undercuts there that really help reduce the visual weight as well as the actual wear, right? The physical weight. So this is just an amazing timepiece. It's one that I've been a fan of for quite some time, and I'm really happy to share it with you guys. Now, as far as the dimensions go, this is a 44mm watch. It has a 14.7mm height. It's 50.5mm lug to lug. It's all stainless steel, brushed and polished. It has a sapphire with a double dome on it with inner AR coating. It has that, of course, that beautiful bidirectional 72 click bezel. Absolute butter, man, that thing is nice. And then you do have of course, a screw down crown, which is signed. This bezel insert itself is actually sapphire and it's fully loomed, which is also great for legibility, especially in the dark. And then you do have, again, that true GMT complication with an independent hour hand. This has a 72-hour power reserve, and it is essentially regulated in between plus or minus 1 second a day or 15 seconds a month average. Now, again, these hands here, that is just a smooth sweep. There's no ticks. It's not like with an ETA 2824 where 4 hertz equals 8 ticks, or 3 hertz equals 6 ticks in a second. Essentially, this is just straight up gliding. It's not like there's just a super high vibration on there that's making it appear smoother. It is actually just a very, very smooth and mechanical glide there that is just absolutely satisfying to take a look at. Of course, when you look at it, it does have applied indices. It has lume. It's a sports watch. Very nice. It has Seiko Lumibrite, of course. This is actually water resistant to 20 bar or 200 meters because it does have that beautiful signed screw down crown, as you can see when it will focus. There we go. So really beautifully done from that standpoint. Everything is solid, guys. Solid links, solid end links. And not only is it solid, as you can see on the back, they're all actual separate pieces. The bracelet itself is actually kept together with a very interesting kind of 2 screw and then 1 kind of center pin. Essentially, you put 2 screws on each end, and then there's a center pin held in the center by those 2 screws. They don't screw into the pin or anything like that. They screw into the link. So really interesting from that standpoint, but it seems to work really well. Obviously, the pieces are very, very small though, so you do have to be quite careful. You do have these beautiful links, great milled folding clasp, as you can see. Nicely contoured here, nicely signed with the GS for Grand Seiko. Nice push button triggers there, and then you can see underneath it's actually nicely milled out and everything from that standpoint as well. And the closing mechanism, it has a bit of a lip here to cover any gap, which I think is really nice aesthetically. And also you'll see it has a half link essentially to really dial things in, because it doesn't actually have any micro adjustments within the clasp. So yeah, this thing is pretty sweet. It has a 21 millimeter lug width, which is a little odd. It does taper down to 18 millimeters on the bracelet, which is really nice. Everything's solid and brushed, yada, yada, yada. This thing is a Grand Seiko. One thing though that I really wanted to do was kind of show you guys. We'll start, at kind of the lower end, because I think people are pretty quick to praise Seiko, especially Grand Seiko. I think there's, nobody who's denying their level of fit and finish. So I did want to show you guys some of the differences, between a watch here that's like a $140 watch. That's a Seiko. It has sapphire. It has a quartz movement, very accurate there, applied indices. It has lume on it. This thing is pretty sweet. This is the SUR. We'll have a full review of this model soon, but as you can see there, very similar design language, right? This Grand Seiko shouts Seiko. It's not like some watch that is trying to be anything besides absolute, distilled Seiko. Now, when you look at something like this is kind of what we're more used to, at least within the US market, when you're looking at a Seiko watch. And this is something that is, kind of a department store model. And it's pretty decent. It's pretty nice. But as you can see, these aren't separate links. Here, they're separate. You can see on the back. They're fully separate. There's 3 main links, and then the 2 end, essentially the polished pieces. Here, this is all just one piece. You're even seeing here that these are folded, so they're not, these are hollow links essentially, and they're just contoured to look like they're multiple pieces, but they're really not. There's just some engraving that they've done. And then, of course, everything here is all stamped out and hollow. But it's pretty cheap, and it's pretty handsome. And I thought, hey, why not show you guys? Yes, there's a big difference between these 2 watches, and I think that's something. This is kind of what people expect when they think of Seiko versus Grand Seiko. They're just like blown away. Head and shoulders above, and then this is something that is completely more bargain, brand. But when you actually take a look at, some other offerings, let's move into Seiko 5, which is a little step up here. You'll see that, again, you still have hollowness all throughout here. As you can see, pop open the clasp. all stamped out, hollow end links. You do get a display case back, which is nice, and a hacking hand windable movement. But you're getting, you know, you're still, but here you got some nice loom. You have a chapter ring that's aligned, which is nice. And the crown, of course, isn't signed or anything like that, but it has some of those nice family contours. Look at that contour there. Then look at this contour here. So there's some family resemblance there, which is really nice. So again, you look at a Seiko 5, okay, blown out of the water. You're right. Okay, so now let's move on to something like the very popular, was considered kind of a baby Grand Seiko. This isn't the SARB. Also, I tried to choose all watches that were on factory bracelets so that we could compare the bracelets, but this is the SCVS001, which is basically kind of the SARB 035's daddy. It is actually much nicer in comparison. Nicer details. You don't have a chapter ring. I've done a full review on this model, but it has the same case. It has similar bracelet, except you have this kind of really nice beads of rice style. But if you look at the chamfer here on the end, that's similar to the SARB bracelet, right? It has that beautiful chamfer on the end. But when you compare it to the chamfer on the ends of even this well-worn Grand Seiko, you can see it's quite sharper on the Grand Seiko. And again, you're getting a lot of, you know, comparables when you look at that design aesthetic. These look like they're related, and they have a lot in common, right? Even you get a signed crown and all that. You have essentially very similar case shape, as you can see here. And with those swooping lines that really just wrap right around your wrist. So it's getting a little closer now. Now it's, you know, this was quite beautiful, right? You're not saying too much about that, but let's actually go in for something that is on like the lower end of your Prospex. This is for me like the sweet spot for Seiko. This is kind of their entry level dive watch, and it's great. It's immaculate. I love the size. I love the way it wears. But when you look at it, this is the mini turtle compared to this bad boy at 44 versus 42. These are tricky watches that just wear so much smaller because of their Seiko little undercuts. As you can see, shared language there. But again, you look at the bracelet, it's just a single link that's contoured to look like other links. They just basically do a little bit of engraving, some polishing, and essentially it's, you know, all hollow all throughout there. So, but this is a really nice watch, and it's within the Seiko Prospex line, and I really do enjoy it. Now, another like a kind of nice like one-to-one comparison is this bad boy right here, which is my blue Alpinist with my secret kind of pre-Presage bracelet there. As you can see, it's a very similar style where you have the 3 links, and then you have the polished kind of center accents there. But you can see here, there's actually an H across. So essentially, these outer links are connected, and then the center piece is actually another piece that kind of clips on top. Essentially within the H, it goes over it, and then it has the same look, but of course it's cheaper and easier to mass produce. But when you actually look at the finishing, I gotta say, guys, this isn't too far off. Take a gander at that. That's surprisingly similar. I mean, of course you're not getting the refinement of that outer edge bevel on the links, but that's not something to cough at. That is pretty impressive. So I'm actually was really impressed to see these kind of side by side. And it wasn't any disrespect to the Grand Seiko. It was more so a little bit of kind of extra appreciation for the bracelet. And of course, there's full reviews on my channel of all these watches. Okay, now let's get to another sporty watch, my SBDC101. And now, yeah, there's definitely some DNA that's shared here, guys, when you look at that. But now you're getting a little bit closer. You're getting some nice fine bevels in there, you know, some Zaratsu finishing. You're getting, of course, the nice anti-scratch coating, which gives it a little bit of a different tint. Look at the bezel work on here, on the teeth on this bezel. Absolutely immaculate, guys. This thing is awesome. And then, you know, again, it's still that same kind of price saving. It's really just a little H that goes across with a little hook that goes over it that makes essentially 1, 2 links look like 3, right? But it's nicer. It actually has a milled clasp there. As you can see, the folding portion is fully solid, similar to the Grand Seiko, all solid and milled. And I gotta say, this is pretty close, you know. Obviously, I'm not saying this is Grand Seiko level, but there is more than a passing resemblance, not just in the aesthetic, but in the actual level of finish. The fit isn't anywhere, you know, it's not as close. It's really, and I've tried to describe this before. Fit and finish are two different things, right? The finish is like the polishing, the brushing. The fit is how tight everything fits together, right? You're not seeing any gaps in between those lugs. I can try to shake it a little bit. There's a little bit of movement, but that's really just so you can have the ease of taking this thing on and off the bracelet. Now, of course, when you look here, you are going to see some space in here in between this. It's not like loose by any means, but it's just not as tight. Look, I can move that, right? That's not Grand Seiko level fitment, but as far as the finish, it's getting close. This thing is not too far off. It doesn't have a signing crown or anything like that, but when you look at the details and the level of finish, you have to realize that, yeah, that's actually pretty close. Now what I have next is something I figured I'd save this one for last, because this is probably the closest comparison. This is the Baby Grand Seiko SBGE001 This is not a SARC 055. This isn't you know, your run-of-the-mill titanium baby snowflake. This bad boy right here is actually stainless steel, and it has a 6L movement. So this actually has that 8 ticks, 4 hertz sweep, similar to what you get from an ETA 2892. So really nice. You even get a blued seconds hand there. You get a level of thinness that isn't available with Grand Seiko. I mean, look at this thinness, then look at it compared to this quartz model. I mean, of course there's stuff in the background, so the camera doesn't want to zoom, but look at that. That's pretty impressive. This is a very, very thin watch. It's actually a top-loaded movement. That's how they were able to get it even thinner. But when you look at now the finish, guys, now the finish is getting very, very close. And the fit is getting a little bit closer too. But it's not to the same level as the Grand Seiko. As you can see, if I just try to move that, there's a little bit, you might be able to see it. But when you do look at, say, the attention to detail in the hands, in the dial, I mean, there's definitely a lot more. They're more alike than they are different when you really see that. When you look at the execution on this end link, this end link is probably, you know, a little bit more special, honestly. If you look at the way they did this, you can see that those parts are separate, and that's why it's so well defined, because those pieces essentially are separate pieces when you look underneath. Now, when you look at this, it uses a similar technique, as you can see, but the piece there is just a centerpiece, and then this is actually just engraved versus being separated fully like here. So this actually blends with that bracelet a little bit nicer. So I'll give them that. That's pretty darn close. It doesn't have the fine chamfer on the end. And then when you compare the buckle, of course, this milled section isn't quite as, you know, this one isn't quite as nice on the Presage, essentially. Although it is fully milled, it's similar in that it doesn't have, you know, any extenders or anything like that. But this thing is really starting to get close, right? Like this is not too far off, but this is also a $2,200 watch. You know, depending on where you buy it, you can get them for less. You can see them for charging for a lot more, because this one is limited to like, geez, what was it? 18 something there. 1881. Oh, so to commemorate when Seiko was founded. So there's only 18 181 of these versus the Grand Seiko, so a little bit more limited. But this one was very special. This is a real standout. This is something totally to a different level than any other Presage watch that you're going to. Honestly, this is probably the best non-Grand Seiko watch that I've ever handled. There are some other, other brands within kind of the JDM line, like Brights and Aten and all, some other very interesting ones there. But this one comes close. And it's, again, this isn't a knock against Grand Seiko. I think it's just for people's perception. People are so quick to just swear by Grand Seiko because they see a couple of macro shots, they see a couple of reviewers praising it, this and that, a couple of high-end collectors, they love Grand Seiko, and everybody's just like, oh yeah, Grand Seiko's the best. They do the best dials, the best hands, they're just wonderful, right? But then those same people are like, I would never get a Seiko. But I think as we've seen today here, there's plenty of really nice Seikos in comparison, and obviously comparison to the price. This is like $140. So there's definitely some differences there, and this is obviously the superior watch, and it should be. It's the Grand Seiko, but I just wanted to really, I guess, kind of show you guys that these other watches aren't too far off. They have a lot of similar design language, a lot of similar tricks when it comes to the contouring of the cases, when it comes to the detailing of the cases, when it comes to the general design of the bracelet, and you can still get a lot, I think. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on wrist just to see how it wears. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, this little 44 millimeter actually doesn't look too bad at all. It actually dwarfs, of course, like when I went to go pick it up, I was wearing an Alpinist. I came back and I was showing my wife. She was like, wow, why is your Alpinist so small? Like, why is that watch so small? And I was like, it's really not. It's just in comparison to this bad boy, which didn't look oversized at all. I asked her, I was like, does this look too big or anything? And she said, no, it looks like perfect on your wrist. Of course, up close, it's going to look a little bit large, but you get down here, you get a little bit more arm in there, and just not try to think of it as a floating wrist, then yeah, this totally fits fine. And you can see the way it contours and wraps around the wrist and lays. Absolutely gorgeous. This thing is quite grand. The way the light, look at the way the light just dances off of that that sapphire bezel insert. Man, gorgeous. And then of course it's loomed. Like, this thing is a sports watch with loom. So let's actually get into the loom shot, because I think this thing is actually pretty impressive from that standpoint. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights. As you can see, look at that. That thing is an absolute torch. Seiko Luma Bright, just even at a Grand Seiko level, guys, if this watch is meant to be sporty, you better believe they're looming that thing as such. So really great. And then what I like to do also is a low light transition shot, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field, out in, direct sunlight. A lot of the times you're going to be transitioning, in and out of a vehicle, walking underneath an overhand, coming in from outdoors, whatnot, just in generally not as premium lighting, and sometimes you're going to even be in some harsh lighting. As you can see, this high contrast here really exposes a lot of that wear and tear, but generally you can really still see the quality of finish there in some of the less worn areas. The way that the light holds that brushing is actually still quite impressive. The way that polish, the way that bezel insert holds the light. Even here in transitional lighting, it's quite legible. That loom is just immaculate. And this thing is a looker. Just, man, look at that. Just absolutely beautiful. So glad and so thankful that Nick was able to kind of share this one with me so I could share my thoughts with you guys. I'll also do a comparison later on next to some of my favorite micro brands that are kind of within that entry-level luxury range. And I think you guys will be really surprised by just how close some of these watches that people just kind of tend to write off come to something like a Grand Seiko, which everyone essentially is on board with being one of the finest produced watches, out there that's available. So as far as closing thoughts go on the wrist, this thing works surprisingly well for a 44 millimeter, even with the longer lugs. It's really just lovely proportions that helps, and then all of those tricks, as you saw within the case, all the little shavings and bevels and tapers just really help. It's essentially it's a little bit larger than your typical scale, but the proportions are really well done. So that's one thing that helps it wear really well, and visually helps it appear much more balanced. Now, as far as model variations go, there's actually, of course, again, the SBGE001, which has the updated branding. But if you're still thinking, man, this thing's way too big, they actually have an SBGE253, which is 40 millimeters and has a fixed ceramic bezel. So that could be something, if you think that this 44 actually wore pretty good. Now imagine this in a 40 millimeter scale, probably going to wear closer like a 39 or a 38 with the tricks that Seiko does when it comes to kind of their magic with their cases. So as far as comparable models go, of course you get something like the Rolex GMT Master 2 or maybe an Omega Seamaster Aquaterra GMT. Those are going to be more expensive, obviously, but also Swiss, right? And really solid watches, good watches. The Rolex GMT Master 2 is going to be pretty much impossible to buy new, and you're going to be paying a markup for it, even if you buy it used. So there's that. Seamaster Aquaterra GMT, you can find one probably that has a decent configuration that will be quite handsome. But again, when you even compare the Rolex to this watch, when you think about the movement, I mean, this is kind of a more special thing. It's just a higher level of evolution of the mechanical wristwatch movement, so it does have a little bit more significance from that standpoint. And you don't have to worry about anybody robbing this off your wrist. Generally, if they don't think that it's a Rolex or even an Omega, if somebody just sees Seiko across the dial, they're probably going to just leave you alone. Really, guys, bottom line, this thing is a classic among classics. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like. Hey, ooh, excuse me. Thank you. Let's start over. If you guys like the video, please do it like, and if you want to subscribe for more content just like this. And again, thank you to Mr. Nick Shabazz. You are an absolute gem, sir. So I do appreciate this, and thank you. So definitely check out also Nick's review of this timepiece, and just check out his channel in general if you're into knives or watches. So let me know again what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.